Hello everyone, my name is Mings, and today I have a very special video for you guys. After I posted the video about the failure of the Reboot Camp, a former employee of WayForward who worked on the game reached out to me and agreed to do an interview. This is the same guy who leaked a bunch of information to me way back during the game's development, so I know who he is, and I can verify that he's legit. Go watch the leaks video if you don't believe me. Since we have to keep his identity a secret, I will simply refer to him as his codename Anvil, and since we couldn't do a voice interview for obvious reasons, we instead settled on a text-based one over Discord. To make the interview easier to digest, I've used AI to voice his lines, and he jokingly insisted I use the voice of Joshua Graham to represent him, so that's what I did. This interview was very enlightening, and I got a lot of new perspectives on what went wrong during the development of the Reboot Camp, and I think you guys will find it enlightening as well. So without further ado, let's get started with the first question. What was your job at WayForward? Can you describe some of your everyday tasks?
I was a contracted tester. My everyday job was to log in, get assigned an area of the game, and test it to find and report any bugs or other problems to a data center website, complete with video footage, recreation steps, and documentation. One of the big bugs I found was I was able to offload a vehicle from a lander, such as a tank or recon, onto a mountain from a beach.
What was your overall experience working for WayForward? Was it good, bad, or somewhere in between?
The feeling of working with WayForward as one of my initial starts at Nintendo was a dream come true, especially due to the fact I would be working on what is considered a legacy title for Nintendo. The people I worked with all were passionate gamers like me, but sadly, since we were not red badges, we were treated like second-class workers. You could be a senior worker, going on 20 years, but not be a full-time employee that garnered respect among other workers, simply because you were contracted.
What were the developers' opinions on the graphics when they were first revealed? Was there an attempt to have them changed?
Starting opinions from my group on the art style were positive, but right away we advocated for a potential change in direction with the overall aesthetic of it being a tabletop battle. The argument of it being a 3D representation of a battle map, like how they use in war rooms during the Second World War, was their rebuttal. Many of us in QA actually went to YouTube the day they dropped some of those trailers and news for reactions and comments, and shared the public opinion with Nintendo and WayForward. Sadly, none were acknowledged.
What were, in your opinion, the biggest problems WayForward had when developing this game?
Inconsistent communication between themselves, Nintendo, and its testing department. One of the biggest issues during the summer of 2021 testing was that when there were game-shattering bugs that caused constant crashes, it would take days before a new build would be presented for further testing. I remember distinctly the testing. The campaign was described as a literal crash minefield, where the game would crash at any time, making it literally unplayable, especially for those who were assigned to play and complete the campaign on all 3 difficulties for the week. I am currently doing my own game designing now, and will happily provide some screenshots of my work. I understand the frustrations that come with coding and pushing out builds and finding solutions. But during this time, Nintendo was making record-breaking profits, which begs the question why there wasn't as much funding, development, or effort put in for such an important legacy title, being headed by a very popular studio.
Do you know why online multiplayer wasn't prioritized?
To put it simply, because it was broken when I was working there. On top of the fact that the game already had glaring issues with it, that the main development team was so busy trying to fix all these issues that during my work cycle, multiplayer was never really touched by us in QA. We have constantly been making plans to designate a time or week and who would be working on it, but it was always delayed by a new build that needed push testing to be checked first. But with every new build they push, something would break, which delayed multiplayer testing further. Do I think they wanted to make a ranked system and proper matchmaking? Of course. Do I think they were also demotivated by backlash and the constant delays and bugs prevent testing? Absolutely.
Was there any scrapped content or big changes that didn't make it into the final version of the game?
I have mentioned before how Sami's art style has changed a lot, but I also mentioned a few things about Ada. He originally had a different voice actor at the time, and had a completely different soundtrack that had vocals in it. In fact, WayForward actually loved interacting with us in QA, and had us play a guessing game to guess who the voice actors were. And the original Adder theme was such a banger that we constantly talked about how good it was, and many of us jammed to it in the vault menu when eating lunch. But when the voice actor was changed, the music changed. And oh boy, were we disappointed. My biggest regret was not recording the original theme, but I cared too much about respecting the NDA at the time.
Do you personally have any idea how well the game sold? Maybe some rumors from friends at the company?
Sadly, no. I was let go a year early along with a few others on my team during this development cycle. However, I do know there is general disapproval of the game's overall performance. But considering the franchise's history and the curse it holds, a part of me feels they don't care. The record-making profits at the time probably made Reboot Camp an afterthought, let alone with ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe being a concern. Now, with there being 2 wars going on, I am shaky on the game's potential future with content. Normally, it is easy to see how bad units are selling for a game, depending on how early a game goes on sale, and by how much. But Nintendo is so anal about sales that they rarely, if not ever, put games on sale, even old ones that sold amazingly well. It also is important to consider that the game was released very late in Japan, and was not even given physical copies, which only complicates the unit calculations. To quote a Reddit post, they sent this game out to die. They released the game 2 weeks before Tears of the Kingdom was set to come out. With the lack of advertisement and the constant delays, lack of communication with the players, and the ongoing conflict, it was destined to fail.
If you could go back in time and tell the development team one thing, what would it be?
Research your target audience and properly research original material. Reboot and remake are not the same thing. This was an HD remake of Advance Wars 1 and 2, not a reboot. While the acknowledgement of iconic moments within the game, such as what is an airport, is amazing, and a proper showcase of developers embracing a meme, they clearly did not properly research who they were making this game for. None of the prior titles or entries felt as childish as this game looks. The art style for the characters is fine, but the overall aesthetic does not match the story, the theme, or the reality that, hello, this is a game about war. Why are you making your war game look so plastic? They went through the effort of making the units look unique to each nation and themed them around real vehicles and uniforms used by nations themed during World War II, but completely disregarded the fact that this is warfare. The original games had no hint of being tabletop, so why go with this approach? If it were up to me, I would have taken the gritty aesthetic of Battalion Wars and mixed it with Advanced Wars to give the appropriate theme that this game deserved. They were so afraid of releasing this, quite frankly, childish, cartoony war game during an actual war. But don't bother to look within to these COs literally treating their dying soldiers on the front line like toys.
I know my comment section will harass me if I don't ask this question, so please explain the story behind the removal of Sami's jiggle physics.
Oh boy. So during the time Sami was going through some art direction changes, if you look at old trailers of the game and look at her now, you will notice she is a bit different. Her original look was inspired by some of her old art designs from the original games. The way she stands casually in her win pose and her CO select pose is the original style they were going with. Her original look and facial structure is still seen in her CO power activation, her win and selection pose, and in the old trailers with her original reactions. But WayForward decided to change her look, make her stand up straight, and be at attention at all times, rather than the cool, collected frontline soldier she is depicted as. Along with these new changes was when she would win a battle between units, she would throw her head back and laugh, bobbing her head up and down, along with two other things. Go ahead and hate on us for doing this, but we instantly told them that needs to be fixed. Now I know plenty will be upset about it, but some women felt it was just egregious. Not to mention that the jiggle just looked bad and very uncomfortable and painful. But a majority of us felt it was disrespectful to the character. Trust me, I get it. But WayForward was just too comfortable doing this, considering Shantae has carried them for so long by literally just shaking her hips and bobbing everywhere. They didn't have to pervert the River City girls, so why should they do that to Sami?
Lastly, what do you think were the biggest reasons the Reboot Camp failed?
COVID, the war in Ukraine, and the problem with contract workers. Nintendo was so hateful of the idea of work from home. Every Wednesday there are big company meetings, and every time they tried to push or advocate to back in office work, completely disregarding the danger it posed and the difficulty it caused. These meetings only served to make remote workers anxious, because at any time they could be told to pick up all their gear and return to office, or just be let go. Obviously, a lot of games during this time were going through the roughest patches. The biggest example was Halo Infinite, and the nightmare development that went through, which is a different beast altogether. If major products like that failed miserably and are still picking up the pieces of recovery to this day, a small backwater project that was overshadowed by record-breaking profits would certainly follow the same problem. The war in Ukraine certainly was a massive problem for developers too. As for WayForward and Nintendo, I can easily see developers being discouraged to work on a war game that features a, quite frankly, Russian-themed nation invading a neighboring nation for territory. Activision releasing Modern Warfare 2 in 2022 was done without any hesitation. However, contract working is something that people are finally realizing is a major issue. To explain briefly, Microsoft and Nintendo follow the same contract working logic. They hire you as a contract worker for 18 months and may choose to reassign you or not, or in the rare off chance, make you a full-time employee. This poses a few issues. 1. Contract developers could work on crucial elements for a game or the game engine. But if they are released, they have to get someone brand new to fill their spot, learn their engine, and try to figure out what that person was doing prior to leaving and then build on top of that. 2. Contracted workers, despite how long they were working there, are treated as second-class workers. During my time, a majority of people were getting laid off, while Nintendo was busy working on union busting. Eventually, in 2022, someone spoke out and was granted a $25,000 settlement. Along with that, they made every single contracted worker into full-time employees right on the spot. And this was after the massive layoff wave. They cut off a lot of people to avoid giving too many workers benefits. I was one of them.
So yeah, that was the whole interview. I want to add some of my thoughts after listening to it. Obviously, Anvil is just one of the many people who worked on the Reboot Camp, and it's not fair to judge an entire game based on the opinions of one person who was laid off halfway through the game's development. But I still think he confirms one of my creeping suspicions about this game. And that's the fact that Nintendo just didn't care about it that much. They most likely treated it as a side project and didn't contribute anywhere near enough resources towards its development. And when something isn't treated as important, it seldom turns out good. I also gotta say that after listening to Anvil talk about contracted workers, I am convinced that this is something that is not healthy for the development of any game that utilizes them. It's obvious to me that this is just one of the many ways companies save money, as contracted workers are obviously less costly than full-time employees. But after hearing Anvil talk about how he and his fellow employees were treated as second-class workers, I can't imagine the morale in the office was very good, and that has to have hurt the development of the game. Advanced Wars may not be viewed as a very big franchise by Nintendo, and that's okay. but there really is no excuse for the game to turn out as bad as it did. There are plenty of smaller indie games that lack both resources and developers, but they still turn out fantastic due to the love and enthusiasm the developers have for their own projects. I get saving money, and I also get not pouring a ton of resources into a small title, but I'm convinced that if this project was given to the right people with the proper love for the industry, it could have turned out a great game despite the delays and the low funding. When you look at fan projects like Advance Wars by Web, which in reality was just started by some random guy in a basement, imagine what a small crew of enthusiastic Advance Wars veterans could have done if they were given the rights to develop this remake. The fact that Nintendo just gave this project away to WayForward, a game developer who doesn't even specialize in turn-based strategy games, just goes to show how little they cared about the results. And there is really no excuse to ever treat your own IP in this way. You think they would have learned a little something from watching how Blizzard hurt their own reputation with Warcraft 3 Reforged. And here's another point that I saw repeated in my own comment section many times. If Nintendo had sold this game for 30 or even 20 bucks, I think people would have been a lot more understanding, as their expectations would have been oriented more towards a small indie game. But Nintendo had the audacity to release this piece of trash for $60. When you set a price tag like that on a game, people have expectations. And the fact that they charge 60 bucks for this is inexcusable. It goes beyond simply not caring about the franchise. It looks more like they're actively exploiting it. At the end of the day, a bad game is just bad for everyone involved. It hurts the reputation of the company, the developers, it hurts the brand, and most importantly, it hurts the consumers and the prospects of future titles being released. No one ever benefits from a game being bad, and it should have been in Nintendo's best interest to avoid this as much as possible. However, despite the failure that was the Reboot Camp, I still think the Advance Wars community will stay strong for years to come. The game is simply too damn good, and the fact that so many people are still enjoying it 20 plus years later is a testament to its genius design. My hope is that sometime in the future, a skilled developer will look at this franchise and decide to give it the game it truly deserves. Whether it's from anyone in Nintendo or an independent indie game developer, I look forward to seeing what the future has in store. My name has been Mengs, thank you for watching, and thank you to Anvil for doing the interview. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.